Alt-X in hardops will bring up the mirror tool. By clicking the axis you want to keep, it will actually mirror using the other side as the side that will then be replaced by what you are keeping. So to exit this tool, you can just right click, but the important thing to keep in mind with mirror is that there's a list of options at the top where you're able to configure it. You're also able to choose which mirror modifier you're currently modifying if you're dealing with editing a mirror modifier that already exists. There's a toggle here that will allow you to use either complex mirror or advanced or a simple mirror. So there's basically two mirrors. There's a simple mode where you can just change it tab interchangeably, but inside of advanced mode you're able to change your transform orientation, which we feel is something that should open up once users have an understanding of mirror and orientations, along with your pivot point and where you could possibly want it. There's also mirror settings for things like mirroring decals. If you want to mirror a decal, you would want to texture flip onto you. If you're flipping mirroring multiple objects, you may want to include the active and multi-mirroring, so there's an option for that. You may also want to parent the empty to the main object so you can move it, and so there's also an option for that. So that is basically mirror in a nutshell as far as the options and interface goes. Of course, there's also the ability to press H for help to see mirror options and help if you're trying to get a better understanding of what's going on with the mirror. So another thing to note is that whenever you're inside of mirror, it tells you the name of the operation that you're going to do, what that operation is going to do, and then it begins telling you the hotkeys. At the bottom here, it also tells you a little bit more about what's about to happen, as well as reconfirm to you what your orientation and origin info is. For a lot of the other types of mirror modes inside of mirror, it involves the creation of an empty. When it comes to keeping your origin the same but using a different origin for mirroring, empties will be created. For example, if we change this to cursor, you can see that an empty will be created, but it does let you know that you can always press X to reset. So anytime that you get mirror in a case that you don't understand, you can always just press X in order to reset it. Also, when it comes to this tool, notice that at the bottom of the screen there's hotkeys to allow you to change basically every aspect of the way that mirror is, ranging from you pressing tab to make it simple or advanced, pressing D to bring up a menu for the simple mode or the advanced mode depending on how you're using it. You can also press S to cycle the pivot points. In fact, we have to be in advanced mode for this, but you can press W to change the orientation, and you press S to change your pivot points. You could press V to jump to view if you're wanting to look at it from a certain view and actually mirror it. You can do that in this state, but you can also press X in order to reset the mirror back to where it started. And so just for starters, we're going to just put an X mirror. And so while it looks like nothing, we're just going to tack a bevel on top, and by shift right click placing our cursor here, we can shift A, add a cube, and we're just going to select this cube and perform a difference. The type of modifier the type of mirror that we use is something called modifier, which means that we did not split the mesh in half. We're mirroring it, but we actually are keeping the mesh manifold. And what this means is that this cut that we just put in, while it's also being mirrored to the other side, we can also move it past the mirror point and it won't have issues. So normally if you were bisecting this mesh, you would have a different type of issue. So it does go without saying that, when it comes to mirror, we will just go through a quick example. We'll press Q, we'll go to Mesh Tools and Sphere Cast to make this a sphere. We'll press Ctrl 2 to lower the amount of subdivisions, and we'll press Ctrl A and choose Visual Geometry to Mesh. So let's say we were modeling this as a human head. If we were using modifier, it would get a little bit weird because we're modifying it, but it's taking place, but it's also showing us the original mesh as well, which I'd find to be just a little bit off-putting. So there are times where modifier is a good thing to use, but there are times where something like this could be a little bit visually annoying and actually get in your way after a while. So another type of mirror worth discussing is, we will just go in our Control tilde and remove the mirror, is by pressing Alt X, and we can just actually control scroll to something called bisect mod. So bisect mod will actually split a mesh in half and put a mirror modifier on one side and just keep the real side still there. So that's what we're looking at here. Now we're able to actually model similar to what you would do if you were doing some traditional modeling. So we'll just select this, Control plus, maybe expand our selection a little bit, grab this, move this out, begin bringing this in, roll a couple of loops in here, and we could just begin our model, And this is one of my favorite ways to model, but if you're modeling using, bisect modifiers, you definitely don't want to be using booleans because it will have issues with the mirror junction point. So even though this is, really the most basic example here, we'll press W and change the selection tool to N-gon, and we'll just grow this up in here and slide this back and replace it and do the same thing here. And we're just, building the shape of, like a human bus if we were just doing, just a simple study. But I just want to show how, you would use something like bisect in action in order to actually do something, but, you definitely wouldn't be using it for Boolean activity. Just to bring that point home, we'll just bring a cube here, and if we press Control numpad minus, we can see that, or Q and difference, we can see that instead of cutting into the shape, it actually did a union, and that's because there's just a mesh error happening here. And this is because, when it comes to Booleans and our sorting, which we were talking about here, we will always place the Boolean modifier before the last mirror in order to help mirror it to the other side to assist users. But we see in this case that what you actually want is for it to be first, and that you want to mirror this to the other side manually. So there are ways to actually work around bisect, but it does involve being mindful of your modifier stack order. And so when it comes to checking your modifier stack order, that's just a matter of you, going in something like modifier scroll, which is just shift clicking mod scroll toggle. And we just look at what the first mod is, or what the mesh looks like without a mod, then the first mod, then the second mod, and we see that that's a manifold evaluation. But that's just a little bit of what you can expect whenever you're using mirror in action. So we'll make a new scene, and I'll press Q, and we'll just add a bevel to this. And another thing you can do is mirror from view, which I use quite a bit. An easy way to show that is we'll just scale this out, we'll bevel it, and then we'll just press R45 to just rotate it 45. Maybe R45 minus, and we'll just position this. But let's say we wanted to mirror this, but we want to keep this origin, and we also want to keep the orientation of the rotation. We don't want to apply it. So we can press Alt X. We see that it's not where we want it, so we press V. So now we're mirroring across view, but we're not mirroring across the 3D cursor. We can just go here, choose cursor as a transform orientation. Actually, for this one, we want to choose view. For the origin, we want to choose 3D cursor. Sometimes I still make that mistake myself, so it is something that we discuss internally. But now that we've mirrored this, we still have the ability to mirror this, the ability to rotate this around just like we need, but we do want to try that one more time. So right now we're inside of bisect mod, which means we will split it down the middle, then we will mirror it. And we actually don't want to do that. So let's press X, and then we can press V to switch to view, and we'll just change our origin back to cursor, and now we actually have this created the way it's supposed to be. So we can actually rotate this, but we also have the ability to work off of this and mirror it to the other side using like local symmetry and things like that. So there are some advantages to different ways of using mirror. But if you're not familiar with the why and the intricacies of origins and mirroring, I would definitely recommend pressing tab and using it in its most basic form of just going through the states without changing any of the more advanced options. And with that, you should have a pretty good time when it comes to mirror. Just keep in mind that any time that you're afraid or you're lost, you can always just press X and it will reset things back. So we'll just jump to a new file, and I'll at least go over every single mirror state in a nutshell. So when it comes to mirror, there's multiple modes, so we'll just start off from the top. The first one is modifier. We already discussed it. When you bring it up, you can click the axis you want to keep, and this one actually sets up a mirror modifier utilizing bisect, which can be seen through looking at the settings. And what this means is that the modifier itself will mirror and bisect the mesh, keeping everything non-destructive. The benefit of it is that you can use this with booleans and it will just not have any problem, and you can stack them all day. You can cut across the axial line, which is something that we couldn't do in 2.79. And so I've always considered the new mirror modifier in 2.8 one of the greatest gifts that's been added to the current day Blender. The next one I want to talk about is, let's see, new modifier. So let's say that I have this object mirrored, but I don't want to actually mirror this way anymore. I want to instead add a mirror on top of this. So what I'll do is select this face at the bottom, and it appears that I don't have a Shift S menu, so I'm just going to snap my cursor there. And if we press Alt X, we can bring up modifier, which is just a new modifier, and you can see that the handles are darkened out because this one's in use. We can actually click on that to just, toggle that off and on. I'm holding Shift to actually keep it live. But what if we want to add a new modifier? We can press A and we see that we can actually add a new modifier, basically stacking another modifier on top of this. And so for this one, I actually want to jump into advanced mode, and we'll use cursor because we want to mirror on the Z of the cursor. So just like that, I'm able to continue mirroring. And there's more to it, of course, than that. Utilizing Alt V, I could go in here and just roll my view by control rolling the mouse. And if we press Alt X, we are back inside of new modifier. I can press V and we can actually mirror this over precisely, according to our view. And we could also do the same thing here, resulting in a much different shape. And of course, if we scroll through our modifiers, we see that it's just us adding a series of mirrors. So additive mirrors and things like that are pretty easy, but that's basically new mirror in a nutshell. So the next one I want to talk about is mod and apply. So mod and apply is similar to symmetrize, except that whenever it just does the apply, it uses a modifier to just simply put a modifier on it, getting this shape on the other side, and then applies it, meaning that there's nothing left live. So to show it in action, we'll just bring up our mirror, we'll press X to reset it, we'll press tab to go back into simple mode, and we can actually change this to mod and apply. And just notice that immediately this shape is on the other side. And this one comes in handy with things like normal mirroring, things like that. If you have locked normals on an object, you may want to mirror it while keeping your normals intact, or at least not break. Alright, and so we press Alt X again, and mod and apply and symmetry actually go hand in hand. Both of these are capable of mirroring and just being done. We've always had a mode where you can just mirror to the other side and just have nothing else bad happen to you. And so that's where this one comes in handy. So we can symmetrize it, and it basically has done the same thing, except one of the differences may be that, we do a symmetry, it will just symmetrize it to the bottom, but it doesn't keep our selection, which is one of the reasons why I actually use mod and apply now, is because I can just mirror it to the bottom. I still have my selection and I can just keep working, and I know that I have my selection because of the way that it was mirrored. Versus if I go in here and do symmetry, while this works better for high poly mesh mirroring, it isn't the best for keeping your selection. So finally, that brings us to bisect and modifier, which we talked about briefly. But to talk about bisect and modifier, this one will split the mesh in half, making half of the mesh a mirror result, similar to how you would work back in 2.79. But this does make the mesh have a big hole in it. The easiest way to tell if your mesh has a big hole in it is to select everything and go under select and select loop, select boundary loop. And we can see that there's just a giant hole. And by filling it, this mesh no longer has a hole in it, but it also has a giant interior face, which is also bad for booleans. So to show this in action, keep in mind this mesh is split with the mirror mod because we use bisect and modifier. We take a boolean and we press Q to do a difference. We see that it results in a hole. So whenever this happens, it more than likely means that half of your mesh is fake. So you could actually fix it pretty easily, and that's by pressing Alt X, pressing D, changing over to basically mod and apply, and just mirroring it to the other side. And now we have a modifier that's modifying it, but we also have a completely manifold mesh. So if we go under select and we select boundary loops, nothing is selected because everything is manifold at this moment. So that's actually an easy way to get around such an issue, but it is a very popular Boolean gotcha that happens with new users. So Last but not least is another one of my favorite options, which is just pure bisect. Bisect at this point actually leaves a face, which is strange, but if we click on this axis as the one we want to keep, we see that we cut everything off the top, but we kept everything at the bottom. And we could actually bring this up and do it again to the Y. But let's say we don't want this window to close. We could actually choose close after operation and turn that off. And now we just click on the axis that we want to keep, and now we actually have this bisected all the way down to just a small quadrant of what it formerly was. And then if we wanted to, we could just press X modifier when we just mirror it right back to existence. However, we do have a series of interior faces all on the inside, so that isn't the best way to get your shape back to max. But being aware of interior faces and removing them is one of the best ways to get back in control whenever it comes to dealing with your model. So now that we have this shape mirrored back to form, it should be good to boolean, right? Of course not, because the derived version of this mesh actually has no information in it. So we see that it works here, but once we get to the junction point, it converts into a hole. And this is because we definitely want to more than likely apply this modifier. And it's not even so much that, it's that we want the boolean to evaluate a modifier that's properly applied. So the easiest way to deal with something like this is to first move this up the stack. Now it's proper, but we want to bypass sorting because sorting will happen every time we do a boolean. So the easiest way is to just turn that off, but you can also turn off sorting by doing it here. But let's say that we did really want that mirror modifier to work out. Well, I would just press A and we will just add a new mirror modifier to actually do everything that the previous one did. In fact, I accidentally added it a little too overzealously there. We don't want to add one every time, but we do want to make our last mirror multi-purpose. So now this shape, even though it's non-manifold, the first thing that the boolean sees though is a manifold mesh that isn't going to be moved. In fact, we can turn off the bypass sort for this because we're only going to move the last mirror modifier in the stack. But just like that, we are able to continue working. And so really a matter of modifier awareness is required in order to get the most out of hardops, because just a simple mishap of allowing a boolean to evaluate a non-manifold mesh can cause issues that will basically make your mesh appear like it's made out of paper with holes in it. And if we look at this, we see that everything is just mirroring great. So if we press Q and we go under operations and modifier scroll, we can see that this is our first unmodified mesh. First we make it mirror, then we make it bool. But we don't mirror it until after these booleans happen, and we don't let the booleans evaluate anything except a manifold mesh. So that's the main thing to keep in mind when it comes to understanding mirror inside of hardops. So to finally wrap it up, we will talk about the locations. So basically local is the local rotation of your object. If we have it rotated, you can see that it's oriented to the local rotation of the object, with the alternative being you setting it to global. So if I want to mirror this globally but keep the local orientation, I can do that, but keep in mind that it will create an empty, and the help will always notify you that an empty is being created. And there's also alternatively view and cursor for your orientation. Cursor is a little bit more troublesome to orient. It's easy to locate, harder to orient, so it's less used. But when it comes to your pivot point, the cursor definitely has its time of day to play. So when it comes to understanding your pivot points, that comes with general Blender understanding, because we are utilizing the same pivot point system when it comes to our mirror and our empty placement. But for the most part, if you ever get lost with your mirror, just press X and you'll reset it back to its default state.